He wiped his hand, literally wiped his hand on a linen napkin after shaking mine like I just rubbed dirt on him. Then, without blinking, he said the sentence that turned a family dinner into a corporate funeral. If you want to marry my daughter, bring $200,000. We don't let men like you in for free. I hadn't even touched my soup. The room froze, not because anyone gasped, but because they didn't. Like this was normal. Like it was a price tag, not a threat. Julia blinked, then let out an awkward laugh. Dad, she said, dragging the word out like it was some off-color joke. But it wasn't. He didn't crack a smile. Just leaned back in his high-back leather chair, fingers steepled like a discount Bond villain watching for my reaction. I didn't give him one. Not the kind he was hoping for, anyway. I calmly set my wine glass down, Pinot Noir, overpriced and room temp, and said with all the warmth of a weather report, "Then I'm canceling every contract your company has with mine." The man's face drained faster than the wine in his glass. He blinked once, twice, then slowly leaned forward like maybe he misheard me, or maybe he thought the gravity of the room, these Roman columns and oil paintings and forced smiles, would somehow make me fold. It didn't. For context, because I know how this sounds, I'm not the kind of man people usually expect at a dinner like this. My shirt was tailored, yes, my watch, silent flex. But no, I didn't arrive in a Bentley, and no, my company isn't on the cover of Forbes. We just happen to run the back-end logistics for half the concrete Kingswell development pours across the eastern seaboard. Quietly, efficiently, which is exactly how I like it. I let the silence hang for a beat longer, then reached for my napkin, wiped my mouth, slowly, deliberately, and continued eating. Now before we go any further, if you've gotten even this far, do me a favor. Tap that subscribe button. Most people don't, but it helps more than you think and keeps our team going with stories that peel back the curtain on what power really looks like behind the fancy smiles. Anyway, back to dinner. The rest of the table was a portrait in stunned stillness. Julia's mother was frozen mid-sip, her pearls trembling ever so slightly against the glass. Her brother, a hedge fund kid with the jawline of a bulldog and the IQ of a houseplant, looked back and forth like he wasn't sure if this was a negotiation or a duel. Julia gave me a look I'd seen maybe once before on our third date when I called out a restaurant owner for barking at his staff, a mix of disbelief, pride, and terror. But this time, the pride was missing. Her father didn't say another word for the next 20 minutes. Neither did I. The food arrived. Veal with saffron risotto, because heaven forbid we eat like humans. And I ate every bite, cleaned the plate, actually, because there's something deeply satisfying about enjoying your meal while a man who just tried to extort you is calculating how much money he's about to lose. Julia leaned in partway through and hissed under her breath, "You're serious? You're actually going to cancel everything?" I didn't look at her, just replied, "You'll see." After dessert, some deconstructed nonsense with basil foam, we stood to leave. Her father extended his hand again, this time reluctantly, like a man who just remembered he might need me. I ignored it. Instead, I turned to Julia and asked, loud enough for the table to hear, "Are we taking separate cars?" She didn't answer. In the car, she finally exploded, "What the hell was that? You embarrassed him." "He embarrassed himself," I said, scrolling through emails. "I just reacted with dignity. He's old school. That was his way of testing you." "Interesting test," I muttered. "Extortion by napkin. You can't just ruin his business because he said something offensive." "I'm not ruining anything. I'm disengaging." "Big difference." She crossed her arms, fuming. "He'll never let this go." I smiled. "Neither will I." By the time we got back to my place, my mind had already mapped out the first 4 dominoes. I wasn't just serious, I was ready. This dinner wasn't a disaster, it was permission, the green light I'd been waiting for. Because what Julia's family never realized was this: I didn't build my company to be liked. I built it to be needed. Nobody spoke for the rest of dinner. Not a word, not even the clink of silverware on porcelain, just muffled chewing and the occasional forced cough, like everyone was pretending we hadn't just detonated the table's hierarchy in under 30 seconds. Julia's father sat there like a man trying to reel a fish back in after the hook snapped. His eyes darted between me and Julia, and every few minutes he'd clear his throat, lift his glass, and let it hang midair, waiting for someone to toast or bail him out. No one did. Julia kept her voice low, whispering through her teeth, "What the hell are you doing?
she hissed, smiling for optics. You're gonna ruin everything. Everything. Over one rude sentence. I dabbed at my mouth with my napkin, deliberately slow. One rude sentence, I murmured back.
That sentence was the entire business model of your family. Her mother across from us was pretending to fuss with her pearls, but I could see her knuckles whitening as she twisted them over and over, like a rosary for the socially damned. Her brother was now on his third whiskey and had the vacant, blurry look of a man who doesn't fully grasp what's happening but knows it's bad for his trust fund. Her father finally tried to recover with a half laugh. You know, son, sometimes people test each other in strange ways. I'm not your son, I said without looking at him. And if that was a test, you failed. More silence. We made it through dessert. Lemon tart, lovely crust, flavorless. When the espresso came, I downed it in one bitter gulp and stood. Thank you for dinner, I said, offering a nod to the room. Julia, are you ready? We walked out to the car in silence. Once inside, doors shut, she exhaled sharp through her nose like steam hissing from a cracked pipe. Tell me you're bluffing, she said. Tell me this is just a scare tactic. I didn't answer right away. I tapped a note into my phone, flagged it for Monday morning, then looked at her. No bluff, just precision. Julia laughed in disbelief. This is insane. Do you even realize what canceling those contracts means? Do you know how much that affects your bottom line? I do, I said. I also know how many holes Kingswell's projects fall into without my back-end logistics. Do you? That shut her up. She stared out the window the whole ride back, arms folded like armor. I didn't push. I'd said what I needed to say. Her family had made it clear what they valued, and it wasn't love or partnership or mutual respect. It was legacy, and they assumed mine didn't count because it didn't come with country club votes or surnames and brass. The next morning, my team got the memo at 7:12 a.m. Subject: Kingswell. Vendor status: 2. Legal. Ops procurement. Effective immediately. Review all active vendor relations with Kingswell Development Group. Prioritize termination clauses, exit options, and transfer feasibility. Hold on all new engagements. Full audit to follow. M. My legal advisor, Ann, replied within 10 minutes. Understood. You want soft detachment or scorched earth? I typed back one word. Surgical. There was no rage in this. No tantrum. No vendetta. This was a controlled disassembly. I didn't need a public fight. I needed leverage, and leverage only works if you don't flinch. By 9 o'clock, the preliminary report landed in my inbox. I scanned it while sipping my coffee. 6 major contracts, 4 supply nodes. 3 contingency bypasses built by us, which Kingswell had never bothered to understand. In short, we were the spinal cord of their mid-tier builds. And they hadn't even realized that a soft detachment would take 2 quarters. A surgical one? Less than 3 weeks. I stared at the spreadsheet, thinking about that dinner table, that napkin, that smile. You don't wipe your hand after shaking mine and expect no consequences. Julia called around noon. I let it ring. She sent a follow-up text. Please don't do this. He's just, stubborn. He didn't mean it. I didn't respond because I'd seen what people mean when they think they're untouchable, and I planned to show them exactly what it meant to be touched back. With precision. It took less than 48 hours for the back channels to open. The first call came from Julia's father. Not to me, of course, but to her. Midday, she was at her office trying to pretend like our lives weren't imploding under her designer heels. I could hear his voice through her phone even though it wasn't on speaker. Barking orders, not requests. Orders. You need to get him in line, he said like I was a misbehaving dog and she held the leash. This is bigger than pride. Do you understand what he's doing? You fix this, or we fix it our way. Julia's voice was strained, stuck somewhere between panic and denial. He's not listening to me, she said. He's different right now. He's arrogant, her father spat. He thinks we need him. She didn't respond, because deep down, she knew I wasn't thinking that. I knew it. The second call came that evening from someone who used to be a friend, at least on the surface. Anthony Delacourt, a Kingswell executive VP. We'd played golf once, traded business cards at some regional logistics summit. The kind of a guy who thought name-dropping his alma mater was a personality trait. He started the call with faux concern, all smiles through the phone. Michael, hey, look man, I heard about the situation at dinner. I just wanted to reach out personally. No reason a family squabble should interfere with good business, right? I let the silence hang. He hated silence. We value what your team does. Let's not let this dinner nonsense poison something profitable. This isn't about dinner, I said flatly. He paused. Then what is it? It's about leverage. Click. No more words needed. The real panic didn't start until the next morning. That's when the first whispers reached me through our mutual vendors. Not direct, never direct, but through third-party murmurs. One supplier's rep mentioned Kingswell suddenly asking for backup haulers. Another said they were reviewing alternate fulfillment plans, but sounded unsure, like someone had finally told the king the drawbridge was retracting, but forgot to tell him the moat was full of sharks. Julia came over that night. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. She didn't even knock, just walked in and dropped her bag on the floor like it weighed 40 pounds. They're freaking out, she said. My dad hasn't left his office in 12 hours. My brother tried to call in a favor with the state assemblyman. And Anthony, your friend, the VP, said you hung up on him? I didn't look up from my laptop. I didn't hang up. I ended the conversation. She sat down across from me, searching my face. What's the end game here, Michael? You cut them off. They retaliate. What do you want? Revenge? No, I said. I want clarity. She laughed bitterly. You're talking like this is chess. It's not chess, I said. It's autopsy. I'm just making sure they don't mislabel the cause of death. What Julia didn't know, and what her family hadn't bothered to read in their eagerness to flex generational wealth, was that every contract we'd signed with Kingswell had been engineered with surgical precision. My legal team and I had structured them years ago with full autonomy clauses. I could exit at will, no penalties, no clawbacks. Kingswell, on the other hand, had baked in dependencies, timelines, resources, fulfillment guarantees, all assuming my company would never walk. They'd built a skyscraper on rented land, and I just handed them the eviction notice. By Friday, Kingswell had sent 3 separate emails. 2 marked urgent, one from a panicked in-house counsel requesting a meeting to clarify recent contract activity. I forwarded them to my COO with a simple note. No response. Yet. Behind closed doors, they were scrambling, trying to call vendors, reprice materials, reroute schedules, but we'd been the quiet current underneath their projects for 5 years. They didn't know the terrain anymore, and worse, they didn't know who to trust, because people talk, vendors gossip, and when the whispers started with, "Did you hear what happened at the dinner?" and ended with, "Michael's pulling out," the market began hedging. They were realizing too late. It wasn't just about money. It was about control, and I'd taken it back without slamming a single door. That weekend, Julia sent me one more message. My dad wants to meet, just the 2 of you, to talk like men. I typed back, he had that chance. No reply. They thought they could intimidate me into silence. But I wasn't their employee. I was the rope holding up their chandelier. And I just let go. It started with a missing shipment, just one. A specialized modular foundation system meant for the new high-rise project in Fairview Park, the crown jewel of Kingswell's Q3 portfolio. No press release had gone out yet, but the realtors were already selling the views, and the signage had promised move in by March. The system was scheduled for Tuesday delivery. Tuesday came. Nothing. Wednesday. Still nothing. By Thursday, the subcontractor, Mendoza Structural, walked. They couldn't keep their crew on hold with no materials. Site manager called the Kingswell PM in a panic. We've got a crane sitting dead and a workforce billing overtime to wait. You want us to keep bleeding or pull out? Julia's father tried to patch the hole with arrogance. Send someone from procurement to find a local substitute. But it wasn't a local issue because 3 more shipments went dark that week. Concrete aggregates, thermal sheathing, smart wiring systems, each one backed by contracts handled exclusively through my company's network, each one precisely withdrawn. I told my team, no theatrics, no grand gestures, just quiet exits, cancel the transportation routes, reassign haulers, update the dashboards. Let Kingswell call us, not the other way around. And when they did, forward it to legal. No response until they wrote something worth reading. By the end of the month, Kingswell's flagship build stalled so hard it made the papers, not front page, not yet, but a quiet column in a regional real estate newsletter. Project delays at Fairview raise questions. The article cited supply chain irregularities and unexpected subcontractor terminations. Internally, the house was on fire. I knew because the same suppliers Kingswell was scrambling to call were now calling me. Some to ask what the hell was going on. Some to thank me because the second Kingswell tried renegotiating payment terms to delay penalty clauses. They knew it was a sinking ship. Meanwhile, my company wasn't hurting. We'd prepped months ago, all resources redirected to new clients, competitors mostly. One of them, ironically, used to bid against Kingswell. Not anymore. Julia's father finally broke silence through formal means, a thick envelope hand-delivered to my office by a junior attorney who couldn't even meet my eyes. Dear Mr. Reyes, we believe recent miscommunications have led to unfortunate interruptions in our previously positive working relationship. In light of current timelines and mutual market reputations, we propose a revised agreement with favorable terms for both parties. It went on for 3 pages. I read none of them past the first paragraph. My reply went out 2 hours later. 1 page, 1 paragraph. Mr. Kingswell, per Section 12A of our agreement, I have executed my right to terminate without cause. This action is final. No further correspondence is required. MR cold, legal, airtight, no rage, no sarcasm, just the sound of a door closing in the cleanest way possible, without a hinge squeak. That night, I heard from Julia again. 3 missed calls. A voicemail. You've made your point. Can you just stop now? But I hadn't made my point yet, because a point is something you explain. This was a consequence. I could practically hear the desperation leaking through the suits at Kingswell HQ. Internal meetings spiraled. Architects were pushing back delivery schedules. Clients were getting nervous. The accountant, a nervous man named Elliot, who once asked for a photo with me at an awards dinner, filed a report that leaked to one of my vendor partners. We're bleeding 6 figures a day in penalties. Legal's trying to argue force majeure. It's not force majeure. It's precision withdrawal. I framed that quote, printed it, hung it in the logistics war room next to a whiteboard titled Kingswell Fallout, Controlled Timeline. The funny part, they could have walked away with grace. Apologized, owned it, even if it was insincere, even if it was purely strategic. But they didn't. They waited too long, confident their money could buy compliance, that the rules didn't apply, that men like me would back down when the pressure rose. Instead, they watched as entire projects ground to a halt, not because of sabotage, not because of a whistleblower, but because the quiet man at dinner who wiped his mouth and walked away held the thread to their empire. And I'd stopped pulling. I'd simply let go. The headlines started small. Industry side, trade publications, only a certain circle of construction execs and real estate investors bothered to read. But in this business, whispers kill faster than front pages. Timeline uncertainty at Kingswell's Fairview project raises contractor concerns. That was the first 6 paragraphs. No names, no finger pointing, just delays, non-responsive partners, and logistics gaps. But the subtext bled through. By the end of the week, 3 more outlets picked it up. One trade paper cited an anonymous vendor source who described Kingswell's procurement office as panicked, disorganized, and weeks behind. Then came the real kicker, an investor forum, tight circle, invite only, high net worth guys with too much time, posted a thread titled, Kingswell Overstretched? Signs of liquidity choke in new build. That one made Julia's father sweat, because investors don't wait for public statements. They move, and they did. The firm pulled back from a pending land acquisition. Another demanded a review of financials before renewing their capital stake in Kingswell's mixed-use project downtown. Suddenly, the backslaps and dinner invites stopped coming. The old boys club that once held up Kingswell's legacy like a gold-plated heirloom. They started checking its receipts. Julia's father tried to spin it hard. He called it favors. Stage photo ops at active sites. Had his comms director push a press release boasting continued momentum despite minor vendor rotation, but no one was buying it. Because momentum doesn't involve idle cranes and sealed fencing around half-poured foundations. I didn't say a word publicly, didn't post, didn't tweet, didn't grant interviews. I didn't need to. All I did was have my legal team leak a single sentence to one mid-tier real estate finance blog, buried two-thirds down in an article analyzing the Fairview delays. Sources confirm the dispute began when Kingswell refused to honor mutual respect clauses during contract renewal talks. That was it. No details, no names, just enough. The phrase mutual respect does something special in corporate psychology. It's vague but nuclear. It sounds benign but implies scandal. Abuse, arrogance, cultural toxicity. Investors see those three words and their minds fill in the blanks faster than any press briefing ever could. Was it a discrimination issue, a hostile takeover gone bad, an NDA violation? No idea, which made it worse, because uncertainty is a fire alarm that doesn't tell you where the smoke is coming from. The whispers turned inward. Kingswell's suppliers started changing tone from defensive to apologetic. One emailed me directly, "If there's ever an opportunity to work together again, we'd be honored. We weren't aware of the context behind the disengagement." I didn't reply. Their subcontractors started demanding larger upfront payments, risk premiums, completion guarantees. Everyone smelled blood, and nobody wanted to be the last one paid. Even the architects, normally oblivious to logistics drama, started asking questions. And Kingswell's board, oh, they noticed, because by week 3, internal reports flagged growing reputational risk among key investors. Stockholders with legacy ties began calling meetings. Julia's father, once untouchable, was suddenly being summoned to explain things that had never required explanation before, like why the most vital vendor had walked, why no transition plan existed, why the press kept using words like disrespect and refusal to renegotiate. He tried damage control, started blaming a personal misunderstanding, implying I'd gotten emotional. One article even quoted a source close to the CEO saying, "The decision to exit seems impulsive, stemming from a private disagreement." We printed that one and pinned it on the office fridge, because impulsive would have been storming out of dinner and pulling the plug that night. What I did, it was architectural. And the best part, he still didn't get it. He thought I was just another ego bruised by status games. He didn't understand that I built status. That while he was measuring lineage and legacy over martinis, I was measuring failover contingencies and contract liability threads for this exact moment. Julia texted again. "They want you to come in, explain your position, clear the air." I sent back 2 words, "Too late." This wasn't my vendetta anymore. It was the market's. And he was being humiliated on his own turf. Not by slander, not by scandal, but by the quiet, brutal indifference of investors watching their golden boy flinch under pressure. He could wipe his hand after shaking mine, but he couldn't wipe away the smell of desperation leaking out of every Kingswell boardroom door. She showed up without warning, didn't knock, didn't call, just barged into my office like a storm in heels and perfume. The door flung open, and before I could even close my laptop, she was already mid-sentence. "You're burning down everything, Michael." I didn't look up right away. Took a second to save the financial projection I was reviewing, closed the spreadsheet with the steady hand of someone used to escalation. "Hello to you too," I said. She slammed the door behind her, hard enough to rattle the framed print on the wall. "Don't patronize me." "You're the one shouting in my office," I said. "I'm sitting here, quietly managing the fallout from a dinner your father tried to turn into an auction." "This isn't business anymore," she said, voice shaking. "You're hurting people. There are jobs on the line. Contracts are collapsing. My family's name is what?" I stood now, not angry, just done. Being questioned, being held accountable. Her jaw locked, but she didn't answer. I walked around the desk and stood in front of her, close but not close enough to comfort. "Julia, do you really think this is about a comment?" I asked. She hesitated. "It was a comment." "No," I said quietly now. "It was a revelation, a window into exactly how your family sees people like me, like I'm some stray you dragged into the ballroom." She folded her arms, but her voice cracked. "They were testing you." "No," I replied. "They were pricing me." She looked down. Silence. "And the worst part," I added, "you laughed." That made her flinch. "I was nervous," she whispered. "I didn't think he meant it." "But you didn't stop him either," I said. "You didn't push back. You just smiled and let it sit like it was normal." I was trying to keep the peace, she snapped, and I was trying to be treated like a human being. She turned away, pacing now. You could have walked away from the deal, Mike. Quietly. You didn't have to set their entire operation on fire. I chuckled dryly. Walk away quietly? Like they would have let me? They were already preparing to squeeze Julia. They just thought I'd be too polite to squeeze back. She spun to face me again, eyes glinting now, not with sadness but with frustration. You're turning this into a war. No, I said, I'm finishing one. She stared at me for a long time. Her eyes searched mine for something. Remorse, maybe. Doubt. A crack in the armor. She didn't find it. This isn't you, she said softly now. This is cold. Vindictive. I exhaled through my nose. Then maybe you never knew me. Or maybe you only liked the version of me who played nice while being condescended to. I fell in love with the man who built something from nothing, she said. And I'm still him, I replied. The only difference now? I don't need approval from people who'd burn my name into the bottom of a linen napkin if they could. She stepped back like I'd struck her, and in a way, maybe I had. Then her face hardened. If you keep going, they'll retaliate. They already did, I said. This will never be forgotten. I nodded. Good. She stood there for a moment longer, then picked up her bag. You're choosing business over us. No, I said. I'm choosing dignity over silence. She walked to the door, opened it, then paused, still facing away. You really think you're the only one who can win in the dark? I leaned back against my desk, calm, focused. No, I said, but I'm the only one who brought night vision. She didn't look back. The door closed behind her like the final page of a contract, snapped shut with intention. I didn't move for a full minute, not because I was shaken, but because I knew what that moment meant. The line was drawn now, clear, no more emotional gray zones, no more splitting loyalties. Julia was still part of them, still hoping I'd fold for her sake. But love, if it's real, doesn't require a muzzle. And I wasn't going quiet, not for her, not for anyone. The boardroom lights were always too bright, sterile, surgical, like a hospital operating theater, where egos got stitched up behind mahogany tables and power wore tailored suits. That Thursday morning, they flickered once, just a glitch, but it set the tone. The mood inside was worse than tense. It was thin, like the air itself was watching, waiting to see which limb would be amputated first. Julia's father sat at the head of the table, jaw clenched, gray at the temples more visible than usual. He had always liked these rooms, thrived in them. Board meetings were his arena where he could bluff, bully, and charm in a single breath. Not today, because this time the questions weren't polite, and they weren't coming from across the table. They were coming from his own side. The first volley came from Randall Ingram, a venture partner from the West Coast, whose money helped prop up 3 Kingswell developments. Usually soft-spoken. This time, not so much. I want to see the contingency plan, he said. No smile, no warmth. Julia's father waved a hand. We're handling it internally. A temporary lapse in supply continuity. That's not what I asked, Randall interrupted. I asked what the fallback was for losing Reyes Logistics. Silence. The CFO, a man named Doyle who looked like someone's nervous uncle, cleared his throat. We didn't forecast a full withdrawal. The contracts were long-term. You assumed wrong, another board member snapped. That was half our logistics backbone. Now we've got 3 projects stalled and 2 more skating on red line. Randall leaned forward. You want to talk assumptions? I assumed we weren't backing a house of cards. Julia's father finally spoke, voice low and stiff. This is a momentary disruption. Our internal legal team is exploring recourse. Another board member, Elaine from Texas, who never spoke unless absolutely necessary, finally chimed in. Recourse. You planning to sue the man who walked away from a contract he structured better than we did? You'll lose, publicly, expensively. Her voice was flat, like a closing door. Then Doyle, the CFO, tried a lifeline. What if we offered to buy back into the relationship, he said. Negotiate a lump sum to reopen the lanes. A partnership package. But it was too late. My company had already restructured. Our haulers were reassigned. Our inventory was absorbed into competitor workflows. The back-end automation system we built for Kingswell,
already cloned, improved, and implemented with a firm that didn't require a bloodline to validate a handshake. There was nothing left to buy. They weren't just out of options, they were out of time. That's when the oldest board member, a silver-haired founding investor named Carmichael, who usually stayed above the fray, set his pen down and looked directly at Julia's father. "I think it's time," he said softly. Julia's father furrowed his brow. Time for what? To take a step back. The words sat there. No one rushed to explain them. No one softened the edges, because they didn't need to. Everyone in the room understood. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an execution.
Carmichael continued, "We'll need someone less emotionally entangled, someone with leverage outside of family politics. The market's watching. We can't afford to bleed from pride." Julia's father stared at him like he'd just been slapped. "You're voting me out?" "No," Carmichael said. "We're insulating the company. From you." One by one, heads nodded around the table. Even Doyle. Especially Doyle. Julia's father didn't speak. He just sat there, hands gripping the armrests, the knuckles white. A man who had ruled by legacy and now realized legacy wasn't a shield. It was a coffin. They offered him a title shift. Executive Emeritus. A nice euphemism. It meant sit quietly, shake hands at ribbon cuttings, but don't touch the controls. He didn't respond to the offer, just stood up, adjusted his jacket, and walked out of the room like he still owned it. But the door clicked shut behind him like a safe sealing tight. He never even noticed his chair had already been rolled back from the table. The control he had built his identity around didn't collapse in a blaze. It eroded, quietly, with nods and signatures, and in its place, an empty seat that not even legacy could refill. The envelope was thick, watermarked, heavy stock, hand-delivered again, but this time by a senior partner from Kingswell's external counsel, a man who looked like he charged $900 an hour just to breathe. He didn't come upstairs, just left it at the front desk with a nod and a tight-lipped "Mr. Reyes will understand." Inside a formal offer, Kingswell Development Group proposes a strategic reconciliation package valued at $2 million, translation, hush money wrapped in gold foil. It was desperate and bloated with passive language. Shared interest, legacy ties, unfortunate missteps, the corporate equivalent of begging and cufflinks. There was a clause about reestablishing mutually beneficial alignment, another about honoring personal relationships tied to professional success, and a line that made me actually laugh. "We regret any statements made outside the scope of contractual intention. Statements like, bring $200,000. We don't let men like you in for free," I assumed. I left the letter on my desk for 3 hours. Didn't open it again, didn't need to. I knew what I was going to say before it ever arrived. My reply was short. To Kingswell Development Group, I do not enter families through payment, and I do not partner with arrogance. Sincerely, MR. The ink was barely dry when Julia appeared. She didn't storm in this time. No slamming doors, no finger pointing. Just stood at the threshold like someone unsure if they were still allowed to cross it. She looked different, worn down maybe, or just real. The curated edges were gone. No perfect hair, no passive-aggressive smile. Just her. "Can I come in?" she asked. I nodded, said nothing. She sat slowly, looked around the office like it was foreign to her now. Maybe it was. "They sent the offer," she finally said. "I saw. They think this is still salvageable. It's not." She swallowed hard. "But well, what if we just fix the personal side of it?" I didn't answer. "I'm not defending what he said," she continued, "but you have to admit this. This spiral went far beyond a dinner insult." I leaned back in my chair. "It went far beyond dinner the moment he said I needed to pay to be accepted. And you laughed." She winced. "I was nervous. I didn't mean it that way. But you didn't mean it any other way either, did you? I just didn't think you'd take it this far." That made me sit forward. "Julia, I didn't take it far. I took it seriously. Big difference." She looked down, rubbed at a spot on her jeans like she could scrub the discomfort out of the room, then looked up, softer now. "Can't we at least salvage us?" she whispered. "Forget the business, the money, all of it. Just us." I studied her for a long moment, then answered quietly. "Us was built on a lie you laughed at. That was it, the truth, ugly and final. Because it wasn't just her father who reduced me to a transaction, it was her silence. Her smile at the wrong moment, her need to keep peace instead of dignity. She blinked back something, tears maybe, but didn't let them fall. Maybe she still had that armor left. Maybe it cracked the moment I said was instead of is. She stood slowly, almost unsure of how to move, like she was waiting for me to stop her. I didn't. At the door, she turned. You know, I never thought you'd be the one to walk away from love. I met her eyes. I'm not walking away from love, I said. I'm walking away from its impersonation. She nodded once, said nothing else, then left. No door slam, no exit line, just footsteps fading, quieter than I expected. The kind of silence that comes when even the bridge has burned behind you. And no one's left to call for help. The wedding website went offline on a Tuesday. No announcement, no explanation. Just a quiet 404 page where smiling engagement photos had lived for the last 6 months. The kind with curated bios and countdown timers and over-filtered shots of champagne toasts at sunset. The domain just expired, and nobody renewed it. The guests noticed first, not the inner circle, those people already knew, but the fringe ones. College friends, distant relatives, that one VP from her father's firm who RSVP'd yes before even checking the date. They texted, called, emailed, no one replied. The invitations had been sent. Deposits paid. The venue, a historic winery outside Charleston, had been booked 18 months in advance. It had a wait list. A dress was tailored. Her mother had flown to Milan for fittings. The menu had been finalized: wild mushroom risotto, steak au poivre, hand-selected wine pairings. Hundreds of choices, each one wrapped in the assumption of permanence. Then nothing. No postponement, no cancellation post. Just silence. Julia moved back into the guest wing of her parents' estate. Not her childhood room, her mother made a point of keeping that untouched, but a separate wing altogether. Neutral, soulless, a set of rooms designed for visitors who weren't supposed to stay long. The kind of space where you couldn't tell if someone was moving in or out. She didn't unpack most of her things. Just enough to get by, a few clothes, a single photo on the nightstand. The rest stayed boxed, as if even she wasn't sure how long she'd be there. The estate itself changed too, not visibly, not to the untrained eye, but to those who'd known it, lived in it, walked its echoing hallways. The shift was undeniable. It was quieter, not peaceful, not serene, sterile, like a hotel lobby after the guests have checked out, but the music still plays. Her father avoided her, not out of malice. He just couldn't stand the reflection, couldn't look at her without seeing the cost of his pride. His office door stayed closed. He took most calls from the golf club now, where he could pretend the empire wasn't under review. Her mother tiptoed around both of them, walked like she was crossing a minefield, asked soft questions over breakfast. Any plans today? Want to visit the florist anyway, only to retreat at the first sign of tension. The mail still came. Catalogs, registry gifts with no return addresses. One box from a luxury cookware brand sat unopened in the foyer for weeks. Nobody wanted to move it. Nobody wanted to acknowledge it. Julia tried to keep up appearances. She posted once a solo photo from a hiking trail captioned, "Sometimes the detour is the destination." It got the usual flood of comments, hearts, encouragement, vague questions about the wedding. She didn't respond. She just logged off for 2 weeks. Some friends reached out, old college roommates. Her maid of honor. A few tried to console her with cliches. Everything happens for a reason. Better now than after the vows. She ghosted most of them because there was no right sentence, no correct tone, no card with enough empty white space to absorb the weight of what she had lost. Not just a fiancé, but the narrative she'd been writing since the first time she brought Michael home and told herself the story would work out. It hadn't, because stories like theirs weren't fairy tales. They were autopsies. Quiet, clinical. No heroic last gasp, just a slow draining of color until even the wedding ring prototype in her drawer felt like someone else's jewelry. And Michael, he didn't reach out. Not a call, not a text, no late night moment of weakness, because he didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. Weddings usually end with music, laughter, confetti, and hair. This one ended with a blank calendar and a house full of echoes. No scandal, no viral story, just the death of a fantasy that had worn white and promised forever. And like most quiet deaths, it was the silence that hurt more than anything.
The ballroom buzzed with the low hum of post-panel chatter, handshakes, business cards, compliments soaked in subtext. Michael stood just off-center, surrounded by a loose orbit of rising founders, young CEOs, a few journalists leaning in with recorders half hidden behind programs. He'd just wrapped a keynote titled Invisible Infrastructure, The Power of Silent Control. The applause still echoed in the rafters. He hadn't needed to sell himself. His company's numbers did that. 2 quarters of growth, strategic realignments, 3 new contracts signed with Kingswell's direct competitors, and the slide that made the room go quiet. Client loss, 1. Net revenue increase, 38%. He took a sip of water, calm as ever. That's when he saw the man. Older now, paler, shoulders a little more hunched beneath his perfectly pressed suit.
Still clinging to the same gravitas he once wielded like a weapon, but it didn't land the same anymore. Power, it turned out, wasn't permanent, it was rented, and his lease had expired. Julia's father approached slowly, deliberately, like he was walking into a courtroom he used to own. Michael didn't move, just watched him come. The crowd around them sensed something, backed off slightly. A pocket of silence formed. "Michael," the man said, voice lower than usual, not weak, but missing its bite. He extended a hand. It hung there between them, unshaken. Michael glanced at it, then up at his face. "I heard your talk," the man said. "Impressive." Michael tilted his head. A beat passed. The man lowered his hand slightly, just enough to turn the gesture from confidence into something closer to a request. Michael didn't take it. He just looked him dead in the eye and said calm and clear, "We don't let men like you in for free." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was earned. The kind of silence that didn't require volume to feel loud. The kind that turned polished shoes into anchors and suit jackets into armor that didn't protect anymore. Then Michael turned and walked away. No flourish, no exit line. Just a clean, deliberate pivot into the crowd. He disappeared almost immediately into the sea of movement, shaking hands with actual allies, being flagged by a Wall Street Journal editor, nodding at a startup founder who grinned like he'd just seen a ghost. And behind it all, standing a few feet from where her father still hadn't moved, was Julia. She'd seen the whole thing. She didn't step in, didn't call out. She just stood there, in silence, arms crossed over a dress too formal for someone no longer on the guest list, eyes locked not on Michael but on her father, because she finally saw it, not just the handshake that wasn't returned, but the legacy that had been quietly dismantled by the man her family once laughed at, the man who never raised his voice. Never begged, never even got angry. He just rewrote the rules, without permission, without apology. And now the room, this room, filled with the kinds of people who used to orbit her father, was following him. Her father stood frozen for a long moment, then slowly lowered his hand and straightened his tie like it still mattered. Julia didn't move, didn't speak, because some endings don't need words. They just need witnesses.